couple of announcements. There's no audio or video recording, and still photography is prohibited during this session. A video of the forum will be available on the Bremerton Chamber of Commerce Facebook page within 48 hours of the event. Our format today, each candidate will give a 3-minute opening statement. The moderator, that's me, and I'm new at this, so be kind, will ask questions collected from the audience. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. If a question is directed to a specific candidate, the other candidates will have an opportunity to respond to the question. Each candidate will get a 2-minute closing statement. We've introduced a challenge card, salmon shade here. Each candidate receives 1 challenge card. They are allowed to raise it during an opponent's answer to a question. Once it is raised, it's noted that after the opponent finishes the answer, if any other candidates are still to answer the same question, such as happens during primary candidate forums, those other candidates are allowed to answer. After every candidate has finished, then the challenger states their comment. The candidate that was challenged gets the same amount of time to respond. The time allotted for challenger response is 1 minute each, the same as the amount of time provided in answer to the questions asked of the candidates. Wow, that's enough. Timekeeping. During the candidates' 3-minute opening statements, the yellow paddle is raised at 30 seconds remaining, and then the red paddle is raised at the end. During question and answer, the yellow paddle is raised at 10 seconds remaining, and the red paddle goes up at the end of time. And then during the candidate's 2-minute closing statement, the yellow paddle is raised at 20 seconds remaining, and the red paddle is raised at time's out. We all get the rules? Okay, now what do we do? All right. So we will start with Michelle.
So, hello everyone. I am State Representative Michelle Collier, proudly serving the 26th Legislative District, which includes parts of West Bremerton, Port Orchard, Gig Harbor, and Key Peninsula. I happened to injure myself. I was in an accident not too long ago, and afterward, after you get the accident, I was kind of debating as to whether or not I should actually contact the person that I was in the accident with. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to call her. She was so nice to me. So I called her up and I said, I just want to thank you so much for helping me out. She said, I have a funny story for you. She said, the other day I wound up, I got an order about a month ago. I sell dog cookies. I do custom-made dog cookies. And I got an order about a month ago from the Hillary Clinton Foundation. We're devout Republicans. And I was debating as to whether or not to fill that order. And my girlfriend, who's also a devout Republican, said, don't fill the order because the Republicans are going to come after you. And she said, I filled the order a couple days ago, and my girlfriend called me up, and I said, I told her about our accident, and she said, I told you the Republicans were coming after you. So, at any rate, the whole thing is that regardless of whatever people are thinking, I know that there's a lot going on at the presidential level with Republicans and Democrats fighting. However, in Olympia, that was one of the things that I feel that I did very well. I came down to Olympia, and when I first came down, there was a 47-51 split in the House. And then the second year, we wound up picking up a seat, so there was a 40-50 split in the House. So one of the things I did was work very hard with making sure that I had good relationships with the Democrats on the other side of the aisle. And I'm very proud to say that I was recognized for my bipartisanship for one of my Democrat colleagues and also one of the top leaders of co-sponsors for Democratic bills. And to me, I feel like that's one of the big things. We're in a swing district. I think it's important to listen to both Republicans and Democrats and independents alike. And one of the things that I did very well while I was in Olympia, I've been there now I was sworn into office last January, so only 1 term. And during that time, I wound up inheriting a huge mess of an education funding problem from my predecessor. And one of the things that we did very well in the legislature was we added more funding to K-12 education, which wound up making 48% of our operating budget. and that's historical funding for our education problem we have in our state. At any rate, my doors are always open, and I am hoping that I can serve another term in the state legislature. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting us to come to this forum. We really appreciate it. My name is Randy Spitzer. I was raised right here in Bremerton. My parents were, actually my dad was recruited to open the brand new, at that time, East High School down the street, 1955. So started life here, went to high school here, went to college where I met my sweet wife many years ago. We've been married 44 years in October, and have spent 30 of those years right in Port Orchard, where we raised our kids. Background, I started off as a high school choir director. Then I came back to town and joined my dad for a few years in his financial planning business. And then I spent the last couple of decades writing books, speaking and teaching around the world about leadership and what makes organizations work. I learned a lot about how people behave, why they behave that way, and how you can affect it. But their skills, I think, transfer very well to something like the legislature. So I feel like I'm qualified to do it. You know, this running for office was not something on my bucket list. I retired a couple of years ago, and about a year into that, I was approached by a friend of mine who said that my name had come up as a possible candidate, and my reaction was immediate and swift: no. Are you crazy? And then I started thinking about it. I said, well, wait a second. First of all, I'm retired, so obviously I have the time to do this. But more importantly, I have the skills and experience that go very well. So I spent some time talking with many of the previous candidates, including Larry and Derek Kilmer. Derek put it probably the best. He said, well, listen, the chances of winning any election from any party against any incumbent are always a long shot. But if you'll do a couple of things, you have a chance. One is make sure you raise plenty of money so that you have adequate support. And the second is that you get out and meet people. And so we've been doing that. I've been out knocking on doors since January and meeting people one-on-one and introducing myself, making sure that I'm well known. Two things that are really important to me. One, having been a teacher, I want to get full funding for education via McCleary. Now, that brings me to the second thing. Funding McCleary is a heavy lift. We've got to be coming up with, depending on who you talk to, $6 to $8 billion of additional funds on a current $39 billion biannual budget. That's a big number. Which brings me to my second point, which is if we're going to get there, we're going to need some kind of tax reform in order to be able to do it. Because, I don't know if you noticed it this summer, but Washington now is considered the most regressive tax system in the country. And so our sales tax is not going to get us to the funding level. I'd like us to see us work on tax reform as well. Thank you. I'm Randy Spitzer.
And I'm Larry Seacrest. Again, I really appreciate you coming here and enjoyed these debates. I really regret that Jesse wasn't able to get there today. We've had some spirited discussions, I think 5 or 6 times already, that we've had a chance to talk about our positions and answer questions. And it's very good for democracy that we do this. So I'll carry on here, and where possible, I'll show you the differences as I understand them from what I'm advocating and what Jesse might say if he were here. But of course, I'll leave that to you. Sunday's New York Times, in the business section, had a very interesting article by a guy named Schiller, who's an economist back east at Yale. The title of it was Inequality Today, Catastrophe Tomorrow. And Dr. Schiller was pointing out the negative trends in our society of increasing inequality. In fact, today's New York Times has an article showing that since the year 2000, over the last 16 years, the median income in America has declined about 7%. So the average American is 7% poorer than they were just 15 years ago. That's a remarkably, we're the advanced economy in the world, and yet the middle class is sliding away. There's another number that I watch, which is the degree of the amount of education. Now, I'm 55, 60-year-old citizens around here in Washington State When they were 25, 30 years ago, those citizens who are now our senior employees, senior workforce, and 25 when they were starting to work, were the most educated society on the planet. Washington State's attainment levels were the highest in the world. So it is no surprise that Boeing, Microsoft, Costco, Starbucks, all of these high-tech, high-skills enterprises sprung up in the rich soil around Washington State. What's happened in the last 30 years is that our 25-year-olds today are 10% less educated than their parents. Their parents are poorer and the kids are less educated. And as Schiller said, that's a recipe for catastrophe. Now, after my Navy career, I spent a lot of years traveling around the crisis zones of the world, including the civil wars of Colombia and Sri Lanka, mostly in the Middle East. And I watched exactly these conditions undercut the Israeli, Palestinian, and Arab world stability. You could see year by year these kinds of trends happening to us, and that's why I came to work here to make sure those things don't happen in our future.
I forgot to mention that let's hold our applause to the end. Everyone got a little bit. Thank you. Okay, so our first question for the day. There are 2 initiatives on the ballot that advocate getting big money out of our election system. What is your position on the issue and these 2 initiatives? And we'll start with Randy.
Can you refer to which initiative you're talking about?
I don't know what the initiatives are.
735, yeah, 735 and 1464.
1464, yes. You're getting big money. If you don't mind, I'm going to stay seated.
Yeah.
Or avoid the jacking about it. Getting big money out of politics, I think, is extremely important. It's clear, in my view, that the Citizens United decision was a wrong decision. And I am eager to see us overturn that decision. I don't think that money is speech. And I'm dismayed that huge amounts of dollars are pouring into our political system across the country in a way that are affecting it in ways that we haven't seen before. And I'm convinced that it is not good for democracy. So in that regard, I am very much in favor of making sure that we, as much as possible, get undue influence, undue dollars out of the system. With that being said, I do think it's important that candidates be able to raise their own funds as we do. And I think this system that we have is really pretty healthy, and I continue to support it.
Yeah, I'm strongly in favor of reforming our campaign finance system. One of those initiatives is asking you, it's kind of a symbolic initiative, it's going to ask you to vote for the assertion on behalf of Washington State that we'd like to see Citizens United reversed with a constitutional amendment to make sure that you could not, speech is not money, corporations are not people. The other one is an innovative approach to, once again, try to find a way to do campaign finance reform. We'll need to see what you think. In general, I'm in favor of these experiments. And what's important to understand is what's actually happening to us. We have in Washington State with the PDC and our laws a remarkably open and well-managed ethical system of campaign finance. But even so, big money is still arriving and dumping lots of money into the back room.
So I absolutely support finance reform, but at the same time, it needs to be done equally between both sides of the aisle. What I mean by that is it needs to also limit independent expenditures. That is the black money that is in campaign funds. 2 years ago, there was a hit hack done against me, and I think they spent around a couple $100,000 doing nasty attack ads on me. And that's part of the independent expenditures. That's where a lot of the unlimited funds come from. That's not addressed in the initiative. The other initiative, which is 1464, what that does is it allows the campaign needs to be publicly funded. I personally think there needs to be a limit for each type of race, number one. And number two, I do not believe that public dollars should be going to pay for the campaigns. Thank you.
So our next question, what three issues do you think are the most important facing the state of Washington? We'll start with
So obviously, the first thing that jumps to mind is McCleary and school funding. Clearly, we've got to do a great deal. The next one that jumps to mind, of course, is mental health. Even though Kitsap County here has the 0.1% mental health, nonetheless, the state has radically underfunded our mental health system. And if Joe Rozak was here this morning as our moderator, he could testify to you personally about how much that's hurt. But the real number one problem for me is that if you're going to do McCleary, as Randy said, $6 to $8 billion, I tend to lean on the higher side of that. You're going to do mental health reform. It was announced this morning that Western State Hospital was decertified a couple of months ago. We've got serious mental health problems. If you're going to do those things, you need a legislature that's going to be able to work together to do a number of heavy lifts at the same time. The number one problem facing this state is a legislature that is capable of acting.
So one of the biggest problems we currently have in our state is the way that we are currently funding education and making sure that those dollars that we're spending on education are actually reaching the classroom. Right now in our operating budget, it consists of, we devoted, 2 years ago, or last year, we devoted 48% of our operating budget to K through 12 education. And unfortunately, those dollars were not reaching the classroom. And part of that has to do with the funding formula that we currently have. And that needs to be changed. In addition, we also need to make sure that our government agencies are working for us. One of the things that you can see is with the Department of Corrections and how we had so many problems where the people were not being listened to, the workers were not being listened to, and we were allowing prisoners to be released early. And as a result, a couple people have died because of those prisoners being released early. And this is just one of the examples of our government agencies not working for us. And I can keep talking, but I am.
Well, again, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I consider funding education to be the top issue within the state, with McCleary coming down. I disagree with my opponent. I think that when it comes to school funding, we have been chronically underfunded in schools for years and years. So I'm not concerned that we're at 48% of our state budget to do that. Rather, you can look at any of the budgets, go to any of the school districts and see that the conclusion I come to is that we really run those schools on a shoestring. In fact, it's remarkable that what we're able to do in public schools despite chronic underfunding. So the second issue, as I mentioned already, was taxes. And I would agree with Larry, and I've talked about tax reform already. I would agree with Larry that we're underfunding when it comes to mental health. We clearly have some issues there that are spilling over to the police department, and that's not a smart thing to do.
So we have a challenge card up. Michelle?
So I wanted to challenge my opponent, Mr. Spencer. He made a comment that I had said that we have been overfunding or that we have been adequately funding education. I did not say that, number one. Number two, if you look back, for 2 decades, we had one party in control of both the House, the Senate, and the governorship. And they were the ones who were writing the laws and making it so that our current educational funding is what it is today. And it wasn't until 3 years ago when the Senate gained control, the Republicans gained control of the Senate, where there was actually a balance of power. And in that balance of power, that's why we were finally able to get added funding into K through 12 education. And so I do not believe that we are adequately funding schools. What I did say, however, is that the funding that we currently have, the dollars are not reaching the classroom, and that needs to change.
Well, I didn't say that Michelle had said that we were underfunding. I said we have chronically, as a state, underfunded education for years. And I would agree that Democrats share some of the blame for that. It's been happening since I was in high school. But it doesn't mitigate the fact that we really have a big problem in making sure that we have a good, solid education system. I would advocate that the position the Republicans are taking of tracking the dollars is really code for saying they really don't want to be funding education. And and so moving toward charter schools. I'm opposed to charter schools for the reason that they are not accountable to the state and to voters. And instead, I see us building a more robust education system at the state level that would really meet the needs of kids.
Next question.
So, next question. What is your position on banning the "Are you a felon" box on the job application?
I guess I had never, I didn't know that that was a major issue. So banning, I guess I don't quite understand that. So
What's your position on banning the "Are you a felon" box on job applications?
I think that any employer should be able to find out, especially for there's certain jobs, like for example, I work in nursing homes. And for the elderly, they are absolutely at risk for being taken advantage of, for people, doing fraud on elder care or abuse on the elders. And so I absolutely support it. I'm a small business owner. I absolutely support having a background check and making sure that I'm doing my due diligence to have employees who are not going to be taking advantage of the elders that I take care of.
I support banning the box. I do think that we should be doing background checks. In fact, we routinely do. And pretty much every business that I'm aware of tends to do background checks these days. It's just good practice. I mean, goodness, even our church does background checks on anybody who's going to be working with elderly and kids. So it's something that we should do throughout. But the box, the check the box on the felony, has really gotten in the way of reintegrating people who have paid their debt, who are capable of being good workers and can step up. It becomes that barrier that doesn't allow them to re-enter society right away, and actually adds to the chance that they will perhaps re-offend in the future because they don't have any options to them. So I'm absolutely in favor of banning the box.
So a little background. About 95% of the people that we put in our state prisons come back out to live with us. Now, obviously, they paid their dues. Under the Constitution, they are citizens. We need to make sure that they can quickly regain the right to vote, which we haven't finished doing. That they are not impeded from being employed with this checkbox, so I'm strongly in favor of banning the box. That what's called LFOs, legal financial obligations, is reformed. You end up, if you are sentenced to prison, incurring debt and then interest on that debt is usurious. And we trap these people in endless payments, like 12% debt interest payments. What we really need to do is reform this whole system, starting with education in the prisons. We need prison education. If you offer prisoners the opportunity to get educated, recidivism goes from 47% to 7% immediately. We would stop building prisons if we'd start building schools.
So, next question, random. I mean, it wasn't random, but this was what I had in mind. What is your position on prison education as a way of stopping prisoners from reoffending? Start with Randy.
Well, I echo what Larry had said. Getting people educated is really the path forward throughout the society. So whether we're talking about kids, particularly low-income kids, or any kids for that matter, or prisoners. In fact, most of those folks who end up incarcerated are there because they have really come from situations where they lack education, they lack resources, they lack funding, they lack money. So they're really in a hopeless situation. So I'm absolutely in favor of education for prisoners. In fact, I'd like to see that improve. My Rotary Club in Cape Harbor has undertaken a project on their own to help with that. And they're actually working with women in the Purdy prison system to give them a leg up so they have an opportunity to succeed when they get on the outside. I'd certainly like to see state funds being allocated in that way as well. Back to this.
So a little background, 1995, you've heard the merits of having the Republicans take over. 1995, the Republicans took over the legislature and immediately passed an incarceration bill that made it impossible. It's illegal, still, the law still exists. It is illegal in our state for taxpayer money to be spent on higher education for prisoners. They can learn ABCs badly, but that's it. We spend $18 million through the community colleges of doing that in our prisons. As I said, the recidivism impact is massive. Right now at Walla Walla State Prison, Mrs. Warren Buffett runs a foundation. She funds the education in Walla Walla Prison. There are hundreds of prisoners in Walla Walla whose graduation pictures are on the wall, who have been funded by Mrs. Buffett. It is time for us to meet our responsibilities of offering these prisoners an opportunity for education and transition back to living with us and working with us.
So this last year, a couple months ago, I was very honored to be part of the receiving line for the graduation ceremony for the women in Purdy. And for me, one of the things that I noticed was these were people who were getting ready also to leave the prison system. And I saw the glimmer of hope that they had in their eyes, that they would be able to get a job and work and hopefully make it so that they're not repeating the cycle and going back. I don't think that this is something that should be mandated. I think that it needs to be on a case-by-case basis, and it needs to be for people who are getting ready to leave, and to make it so that it is part of something to where people have the opportunity, if they're following the rules within the prison system, that they can get an education and make it so that when they leave, that the likelihood that they're going to come back is small. But it should not be mandated, and it should be on a case-by-case basis.
Next question. What is your position on using assessments for high school graduation?
Great question. So let's get a little bit of background here. We have, as our school board member knows, it's what's called, it's a bizarre name, the Smarter Balance Assessment is a federally required test. It's a high-stakes test. It has completely deformed our education system, imposed a toxic climate on our kids and on the teachers. So my position is that we opt out of that federal testing system now by simply signing a document, going to court, getting an injunction from the feds, and tell them to get out of our schools. We need to bring assessment back to the teacher. That's what a teacher does. Communicate information, make that mysterious judgment of each teacher, each student. Did that student learn? What do I do need next to bring them along? Assessment is a teacher's business, and we should allow graduation standards and grades to be the province of our local teachers. We need to get out of the Fed system and get the feds out of our schools.
So I served on the education committee for the last 2 years, and I supported, I was one of the few people in my caucus who supported delinking the graduation requirement for biology. And I did so because I believe that there are way too many tests going on in our schools. I don't think that they're currently accurately assessing whether or not the student is proficient. I think that there are, in my opinion, I think that there is a company that's benefiting from these test scores and having so many of them. And so for me personally, I believe that we should have some tests. I don't think that they should be high stakes, and I definitely think that they need to be streamlined and make it so that they're actually that the amount of testing is smaller. In addition, I supported a bill to make it so that the test scores were to come back, because the other problem too is that the superintendent of public instruction is not returning the test scores in a timely manner. I proposed a bill to have those come back by May 15th.
When high-stakes testing was being introduced, I happened to be in the process of writing my first book, Accountability. And so I spent some time, I was actually looking at the very same kind of issues in corporate America, assessing how employees are doing and making some judgment about how they're going to do in the future. And the conclusion that I came to as I looked at the research is that high-stakes testing never gets you what you want to get. In fact, I would agree that what high-stakes testing has done across the country, including in Washington, is it's created a hostile work environment. And it's created a hostile learning environment for kids as well. Assessments, when my wife was teaching elementary school, she had lower grades kids, and they would do an assessment each year, figure out where the kid was, where they needed to improve, and then would periodically check for each kid to see how they're doing. That kind of assessment is extremely useful to both teachers and to kids, and helps them move forward and make advancements. So I'm against it.
Next question. Please explain your position on charter schools.
So I was not a huge advocate of charter schools. My daughter, she went to a public school. I went to Central Kids Out High School. My daughter just graduated from South Kids Out. I've always been, a huge advocate of public schools. However, I believe that when I'm in Olympia, I am not there to represent me and my beliefs. I believe I'm there to represent the people who elected me and who my constituents are. And